good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you are viewing from in the world. Welcome to the Silent Forgotten. I'm your host Chris, and today I'll be sharing with you the life story of and visiting the final resting place of the Canadian poet and writer Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford, December 25th, 1846 to February 12th, 1887. Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford was an Irish-born Canadian writer and poet. She was one of the first Canadians to make a living as a freelance writer. Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford is increasingly being viewed as Canada's first major poet. She is the author of Malcolm's Katie, a poem that has achieved a central place in the canon of 19th century Canadian poetry. Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford was the last surviving daughter of Dr. Stephen Dennis Crawford. She was born in Dublin, Ireland on Christmas Day, 1846. The family immigrated to Canada when she was just 10 years of age. Much of Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford's early life is unknown. By her own account, she was born in Dublin, Ireland, the sixth daughter of Dr. Stephen Dennis Crawford and his wife, Sidney Scott Crawford. But no record has been found of that marriage or the birth dates and birthplaces of at least 6 children, of whom Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford wrote that she was the sixth. The family was in Canada by 1857. In that year, Dr. Stephen Dennis Crawford applied for a license to practice medicine in Canada West and started to practice in Paisley, Canada West. In a few years, disease had taken 9 of the 12 children, and a small medical practice had reduced the family to semi-poverty. Dr. Stephen Dennis Crawford served as treasurer of Paisley Township, but a scandal of a missing $500 in misappropriated township funds and the subsequent suicide of one of his bondsmen caused the family to leave Paisley in 1861. By chance, Dr. Stephen Crawford met Richard Strickland of Lakeville, Ontario, Canada. Richard Strickland invited the Crawfords to live at his home out of charity, and because Lakeville, Ontario, Canada, at that time did not have a doctor. There the family became acquainted with Richard Strickland's sisters, writers Susanna Moody and Catherine Parr Trail. Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford reportedly began writing at that time. She was also thought to be a close companion of Mrs. Trail's daughter Catherine, who was also nicknamed Katie. In 1869, the family moved to Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, and Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford began to write and publish poems and stories. Her first published poem, A Vesper Star, appeared in the Toronto Mail on Christmas Eve, 1873. When Dr. Stephen Dennis Crawford died on July 3, 1875, the 3 women, Isabella, her mother, and her sister Emma, all who were left in the household, became dependent on Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford's literary earnings. After Emma died of tuberculosis, Isabella and her mother moved in 1876 to Toronto, Ontario, Canada, which was the center of the publishing world in Canada at that time. Although Isabella had been writing while still living in Lakeville, Ontario, Canada, and had published poems in Toronto and Ontario, Canada newspapers and stories in American magazines while living in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, when she moved to Toronto, Ontario, Canada, she turned her attention in earnest to the business of writing. During this productive period, she contributed numerous serialized novels and novellas to New York and Toronto, Ontario, Canada publications, including the Mail, the Globe, the National, and the Evening Telegram. She also contributed a quantity of occasional verse to the Toronto, Ontario, Canada papers and articles for the Fireside Monthly. In 1886, she became the first local writer to have a novel, A Little Bashante, serialized in the Evening Globe. In her lifetime, Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford published only one book, Old Spooksy's Pass, Malcolm's Katie, and other poems in 1884. It was privately printed and sold poorly. Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford paid for the printing of 1,000 copies out of her own pocket and presumably sent out many review copies. There were notices in such London journals as The Spectator, The Graphic, The Leisure Hour, and The Saturday Review. These articles pointed to versatility of talent and to such qualities as humor, vivacity, and range of power, which were impressive and promising despite her extravagance of incident and untrained magniloquence. However, only 50 books sold. Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford was understandably disappointed and felt she had been neglected by the high priest of Canadian periodical literature. Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford died from heart failure on February 12, 1887 in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. She was buried in Little Lake Cemetery near the Ottawa River in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada. Despite her writings, she had died in poverty, and for years her body lay in an unmarked grave. A fundraising campaign was begun in 1889, and on November 2, 1900, a 6-foot Celtic cross was raised above her grave inscribed, Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford, poet by the gift of God. Hi guys, welcome back to the Sign Forgotten. I'm Chris. Today I'm at the historical Little Lake Cemetery to do another video for you. I'll just show you around the lake here again, and I'll tell you a little bit of the cemetery and who we are visiting today. So there's some people in here today, so we will be respectful and stay out of their way. So there's the Little Lake Cemetery sign. I'll go up here. I'll read you a little bit about the cemetery. So, as I said, here I am at the Little Lake Cemetery in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada. And as I mentioned, we will be visiting the final resting place of the Canadian poet Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford, December 25th, 1846 to February the 12th, 1887. So let's get started, shall we? I'll show you do a little tour of the cemetery first. So as you can see, there's the lake, the Little Lake Cemetery. Sorry, the Little Lake. Now that runs into the Ottawa River and goes in the Trent Severn Waterway up to the Peterborough lift locks, which is, I believe it's the second oldest or tallest or hydraulic boat lift in Canada or the world. I'm sure, I can't remember. So there's the columbarium. It's under construction right now, so we won't go too far in there. My grandmother's in there, or my nan. I'll show you these rules over here, and you can, like I said, I'll show you. I'm not going to read them. You can pause the video and read them if you like. So we'll just go over here, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about the cemetery. So again, I'll show you some interesting things at the cemetery which are worth mentioning over and over again. So this is the awesome Memorial Mausoleum. Now this gentleman was a politician, a lawyer, or a doctor. And there's not a lot of information on him, but we do have a memorial park here in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, and it's probably named for him. But I'll show you the neat little doors, and hold the gimbal up the camera so you can see. I don't want to go get my shadow in there and ruin the video. So I'll show you a little bit over here. There is the family plot of Lieutenant Arthur Ross Ackerman, Lieutenant Arthur Ross Ackerman, who I did a video on about a week ago, the war hero and Military Cross recipient. And there's this neat little war memorial thing here. So I'll read it to you. This says, this memorial garden is maintained by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and Little Lake Cemetery as a living commemoration to the 43 war dead and hundreds of veterans who are laid to rest in this cemetery, forever remembered. Thank you for your service, gentlemen, and may you all rest in peace. Here's a beautiful bench here. This is dedicated in memory of Marilyn and William Reed, Marilyn lived from 1931 to 2020. And William lived from 1933 to 2004. Actually, we'll go over here and I'll show you a little bit about the columbarium. So, again, I will first tell you, the Little Lake Cemetery was founded in 1850 as a private trust company with a public mandate, and was the first community non-profit cemetery in Canada West. Just go over here and I'll show you the view from up here. Beautiful. I get to wake up to that every morning where I live. That's pretty cool. So as you can see, it goes on and on and on. So the original cemetery that was downtown and is now Confederation Park closed in 1854, and the bodies were moved from that location to Little Lake Cemetery here in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, and the Pioneer Park in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, which is just a small cemetery. It's got 3 or 4 stones, and I'll bring that to you another day. And it was other locations, obviously. So this is the chapel. This chapel was built in 1877. We'll go for a walk up there, closer walk. Now, it is under renovations, so we won't get too close to it, obviously. It's pretty neat. Give you a little more of the area. So as I said, there's a few things undergoing renovations here at the Little Lake Cemetery in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada. And as of 2023, the cemetery is 173 years old, and it is still an active place of burials. So the lady we're coming to see was a famous Canadian poet. Her name is Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford. She was born December 25th, 1846, and she died February 12th, 1887. But she's a little distance down here, so I'll just show you a little bit more of the cemetery while we make our way down there to find her. This is section A and B. She's in section D, so if I can find it. She has a pretty neat, unique headstone. And I will tell you more about her in just a second. Pretty big cemetery. A lot of interesting headstones. So again, the person we're going to visit is Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford. She was a famous Canadian poet. She was born in Dublin, Ireland on December 25th, 1846. She immigrated with her family and settled in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Then moved to Lakefield, Ontario, Canada, before moving to Peterborough, Ontario, Canada. Just give me a second here to get my notes. So, she is most remembered for her... Hold on a second, there's a vehicle going by. I'll continue. So, she is most remembered for her work, Old Spooksy's Pass, poetry. She's also published Song for the Soldiers, His Sweetheart, Malcolm's Katie, and His Wife and Baby. Now, I will show you a little bit more until I tell you the rest of her story, once we find it. As I said, this is a huge cemetery, so you just have to bear with me. Actually, there's an interesting one over here I will show you as we walk by. we might as well go down here past the lake. Another nice view. That lake is also famous for regattas, fishing. People swim in there, but I wouldn't want to swim in there myself. A lot of history in here. There's many other people in here that I will take you and show you. Now there's a family over here, so I won't wanna. We'll go up this way and I'll show you this neat little monument over here. As you can see, stretches on and on and on. Look at this one. Big statue up there. That is neat. Beautiful. Look at that. And this is in loving memory of John MacDonald, eldest son of the late Lieutenant General John MacDonald, died March 27th, 1892. I'll have to do some research on him. And Reginald Angus MacDonald. Thank you both for your service. So I have to get my bearings and see if I can't find Isabella, Stewart, Valancy, Crawford. She has a neat, unique stone as well. So I don't think she'd be hard to find. I think I found her. So I'll go to the front over here and I'll show you a little bit over here. And I'll tell you the final chapter of Isabella Stewart Valancy Crawford's life. So we'll go this way. So she's just in here. Over here. There she is. Sorry, there's a gentleman with his son over in the corner over there. So sadly, Isabella passed away from heart failure in Toronto, Ontario, Canada on February the 12th, 1887, at the young age of only 40. So this is the back of Isabella's unique headstone here. I'll show you a close-up of the top. That's pretty neat. And this is the front of Isabella's stone. And it says, Isabella Valancy Crawford, poet, by the gift of God. Now I will show you thank you, Isabella, for what you did for Canadian poetry and everything else, and I'm hoping you found rest. Sorry you left so soon, but thank you again for all you did. And again, may you rest in peace, as well as the rest of your family. Now, I will tell you more about Isabella on the bio section. There's a little bit more. But for now, I will show you a little bit more around here as I walk back to the front, as I'm going to do one more for you today. Actually, I will end it there because there's some people coming and I don't want the voices on the thing. Oh, look at this old stone. This is pretty neat. Robert David Rogers died September 20th, 1875, age 53 years. Wow. So I'm going to end the video there, people. So that concludes today's video. So if you like this type of content, please like, subscribe, and hit that thumbs up button. Take care, stay safe, and we'll see you on the next video adventure. Thank you. Bye for now.
Isabella Valancy Crawford was a prolific writer born in Dublin, Ireland in 1846. She was the sixth and last surviving daughter of Dr. Stephen Crawford and Sidney Scott. In 1857, her family emigrated to Canada, and Dr. Crawford started to practice medicine in Paisley. In a few years, disease took 9 of the 12 children. Dr. Crawford served as the treasurer of Paisley Township, but a financial scandal caused the family to leave Paisley in 1861, struggling to make ends meet. Dr. Crawford met Richard Strickland of Lakefield, who invited the family to live at his home. While staying there, the Crawfords became acquainted with Strickland's sisters, the writers Susanna Moody and Catherine Parr Traill. Around that time, Isabella Crawford began writing too. In 1869, the family moved to Peterborough. Isabella wrote and published poems in Toronto newspapers and stories in American magazines. Her first published poem, A Vesper Star, appeared in the Toronto Mail in 1873. Isabella's father died in 1875, and Isabella and her mother moved to Toronto. Many of her novels and novellas were published in Toronto and New York. She also contributed verses and articles to several newspapers. In 1884, Crawford published her one and only book, Old Spooks' Pass and Malcolm Cady and Other Poems. Journals in London had given it impressive and promising reviews, pointing to her versatility and qualities like humor, vivacity, and range. Crawford paid for the private printing of 1,000 copies, but only 50 books were sold. Crawford persevered, and in 1886, she became the first local writer to have a novel. Crawford died on the 12th of February, 1887, in Toronto at the age of 41. W.D. Lighthall included generous sections from her book in his anthology, Songs of the Great Dominion, bringing it to a wider audience. However, it is during the 20th century that critics gave her work increasing respect and appreciation. In 1905, Crawford's collected poems was edited by J.W. Garvin. Poet Catherine Hale published a volume on Isabella Valancy Crawford in the Makers of Canada series in 1920. In the mid-1940s, a sincere critical assessment by A.J.M. Smith, Northrop Frye, and E.K. Brown called her the only Canadian woman poet of great importance in the 19th century. Poet James Rainey recognized her mythopoeic power in his lecture on Crawford. A renewed interest in Crawford led to the publication of forgotten manuscripts and critical articles in the 1970s. And there was a reprint of the collected poems in 1972 with an introduction by James Rainey. Crawford wrote a wide variety of poems ranging from the eerie mysticism of the Camp of Souls or the eroticism of the Lily Bed. But it is mainly Crawford's long narrative poems that received particular attention. Isabella's poems depict the world as a battleground of opposites, light and dark, good and evil, all reconciled by sacrificial love.
Just a brief note on Irish writing in the Peterborough area. 2 writers come to mind, and they were connected in an interesting way. These are 19th century writers. The first is Isabella Valancy Crawford, who was born in Dublin in 1850, came to Canada with her family, and they settled in the Paisley area to the southwest, north-southwest of Ontario. But the father was a doctor, and I think he had problems, among them a drinking problem. He left Paisley under a cloud, and somehow they came to Lakefield. The story is that one of the Strickland family convinced them that they could use a doctor in Lakefield, and so he came, and he brought Isabella with him. And Isabella had writing aspirations, and she was, I think she was well brought up, and she was a pianist as well. So she became the organist at St. John's Church here for a time. They lived in Lakefield for a time, then they moved to Peterborough. And so Isabella lived in Peterborough from about 1870 to 1876 before they moved to Toronto. Hers was a very short life. She died in 1887, so she was only 37 years old when she died. But she wrote copiously, especially for the illustrated newspapers of the day. And Frank Leslie's illustrated newspapers and Frank Leslie's monthly magazine. She did very well. She made good money doing that. But she didn't publish any books. So her only book was her collection of poems that came out in about 1884. But she's closely associated with Peterborough, and she would have written a good amount of her material while she was here. She connects up to an earlier writer named James McCarroll, who came from County Leitrim to Canada in 1831, so really at the time that the Moody's and Trails came. And he wanted to be a musician, and he and his father tried to set up a music school or a music academy. If you can imagine that in 1832 or 33. Eventually he became quite an accomplished violinist and fiddler and played all around, but he was also a writer and an editor. He managed to take over the second newspaper in Peterborough called the Peterborough Chronicle, which would be the forefather of the Peterborough Examiner. He edited that from 1843 to 1846, when he had to move on because there was a fire that destroyed his print house. Went to Coburg, went to Niagara Falls, went to Port Credit, and then on to Toronto, always writing for the illustrated papers in the way that Crawford did. And I think there's a connection between his work with the Frank Leslie Corporation, because he actually was in their employ for a time, and Isabella Valancy Crawford getting to publish there. So McCarroll himself died in 1892. He did publish 4 books, and he's written interestingly about the Peterborough area and some poems and so on. So those two writers are I'm so fascinated by McCarroll because his story has never really been told, and I've gathered together just an amazing amount of archival material that I'm slowly putting together into a book, two books, one of which will be a collection of his writing, and the other will be a biography of him and the whole problem. You could say maybe a biting the hand that fed him.